Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our session today. My name is Cristina Vatamanu, and I lead the Forensic and the Investigation team from the Cyber Threat Intelligence Lab at Bitdefender. For those of you who don't already know, Bitdefender is known to deliver threat prevention, detection, and response solutions worldwide. But most importantly, we deliver security technology for more than 150 of the world's most recognized technology brands. Now, one of the main roles I have in the company is to coordinate forensic investigations. And apart from the analysis we conduct into finding out what happened, how did it happen, and what damages were caused, we have the responsibility to advise the victim on how to prevent, prepare, and recover from such attacks. So what I would like for today's session is to highlight some of the most important aspects on how to be more resilient as an organization in case of advanced targeted attacks. And we are going to use as a case study a recent investigation that my team handled that fits very well in this scenario. So this is why first we are going to talk a bit about NIKON threat actor and one of its recent campaigns, reviewing the entire kill chain of the attack, following with some aspects that would improve the resilience of an organization when facing such intrusions. NIKON is not a new kid on the block. It has been active for more than a decade. Some evidence among investigations have indicated that it is likely to be tied to China. And the campaign spotted in the wild had high-profile victims that were located mostly in countries around South China Sea. The recent campaign we have investigated started somewhere in June 2019 and managed to stay under the radar until March this year. The victims were from military structures, more Navy and Air Force to be more precise, and the targets were located in some countries from the South China Sea. So they have kept the interest for this geographical area. The purpose of this campaign was cyber-espionage and intelligence gathering. And since we are dealing with military organizations and information about victims is always very sensitive, additional details cannot be disclosed about them. Now, in this particular campaign, we have uncovered a wide set of tools, either custom-made or off-the-shelf tools that are dedicated to specific purposes, covering this way an entire kill chain, as we will further see. These are some examples of tools that were used in this attack, the ones that were executed by one of the backdoors. I will not cover them today since we have limited time, but what I would like to highlight is that the threat actor prefers to have dedicated models for certain actions. For example, it will use a tool to gather sensitive documents in a certain temporary location on some computers, and another one which is in charge of uploading those documents to a Dropbox account that is used to communicate with the command and control server. And they choose to do this in order not to trigger, for example, some behavior detection, because a process that copies files and uploads them can be considered suspicious. Of course, we have identified some backup methods because, for example, one of the backdoors has both capabilities and can be used for collecting an exfiltration process. An important aspect that should be mentioned is that this particular actor is abusing the DLL sideloading process. For those of you who are not familiar with the term, Windows applications rely on dynamic library link files to import existing functionalities. These libraries are called when needed, and the application tries to discover them by looking them up in specific file paths. For example, the application directory or the system directory. If the application does not check if it loads the right library, it becomes vulnerable to DLL loading. And an attacker can replace the legit library with a malicious one, having this way malicious code executed in a legit process. a scenario which is widely used for AV evasion. So NIKI threat actor would bring a package containing a vulnerable application together with a malicious library that will be loaded when the legit application is executed. The library decrypts the payload and loads it in the memory of the legit application. During the investigation, we have identified several applications that are abused this way by NIKI threat actor. Also, in this campaign, the threat actor used two backdoors that practically gave them access to the compromised systems. The commands that the backdoors are able to execute have a wide range of capabilities, from file services and process manipulation to screen capture to communicating with the command and control server and so on. They are practically in full control of those particular systems. One of the backdoors, Nebulae, was actually undocumented until now, and it was used from the beginning of this campaign. But starting with September 2020, the toolkit also included a second backdoor, which was identified as Rainy Day. The command and control infrastructure is located in the same geographical area as the victims. We have identified servers in Singapore and Thailand. And this is a practice widely used by APT actors from Asia, mainly because the internet infrastructure within that particular region is highly restricted. Relying on local deployed CNC server would bring several advantages for the APT groups. For instance, it would be easier to manage and control the servers. And also, when analyzing the network traffic, the CNC IP wouldn't be flagged as suspicious, as it would be a part of the same regional internet infrastructure. Opting for a command and control server deployed anywhere else in the world would have potentially raised some security alarms. Now, I would like to quickly review the attack kill chain to highlight some important tactics used in this campaign. The first two steps, the recon and the initial access stage, are unknown, and these are some of the most difficult to identify when the attack already took place. But there are some traces that indicate that the threat actors used social engineering as an infection vector, based on the names of some of the packages containing the initial payload. Having this, the execution was done most probably through user intervention, abusing in the first step the DLL side loading that we have mentioned earlier. The next steps in the attack were meant to set a strong foothold in the network, all performed with different models. There are several techniques used for defense evasion. Some tools use process injection, some use masquerading. Others are trying to compromise valid accounts and further use them in different malicious actions. There was at least one tool used to obtain local passwords and domain cache credentials. And most of the tools have some sort of persistence implemented. Either they use registry run keys or Windows services or even scheduled tasks. Once the installation is completed and persistence is achieved, the threat actors started to perform discovery in the network in order to find and to compromise the real targets of the attack. Usually, the first victims, the patient 0, are not the real targets. So we have discovery at the system level and at the network level. Once other systems were discovered, they started to move laterally in the network using the credentials retrieved earlier. And they repeated the last 3 steps until the real targets were found. On the system of interest, intelligence was collected. We observe that the threat actors copied some important documents on certain locations, and also screen captures were copied on those locations. From there, all the information was uploaded to the CNC server through some special created Dropbox accounts, or directly through one of the backdoors. Having this way, all the information exfiltrated to the CNC servers, and making it available to the threat actor. As it can be seen, the entire kill chain attack was covered. And what we can tell is that they were really careful and stealthy. The impact and the damages caused to the victims were huge. These were some examples, but there are a lot more techniques used in this campaign that can be mapped in the well-known Mitre matrix. As it can be seen, they put a lot of effort into avoiding detection, being able to stay under the radar for such a long time. And also, we can see a lot of effort into discovering the path to the real targets of the attack. For those of you who are interested on more technical details about this campaign, you can find a white paper published on our technical company blog. Now, this case study is an example of a complex attack that was successful and achieved most of its purposes. And usually this happens not because of one single mistake, that first person who clicks, but these attacks are successful because of an entire chain of mistakes, starting with the patient 0 and ending up with maybe the entire IT or InfoSec department. And the truth is, breaches do happen and can happen to anyone. It is important to prevent them, but it's also very important to know how to respond to them. And this is actually what cyber resilience is all about. Prevention is the best medicine. We all know that. It's always better not to face an attack than to have your security solution detected. And it is the first most important step an organization should consider. We are still seeing so many organizations using operating systems that have reached end of life, or cases where vulnerable applications are leveraged as point of entrance. We see so many risky environments with poorly policies in place. Managing an enterprise environment can be overwhelming, and tracing each aspect that can represent a risk is very difficult, and omissions and mistakes can happen. You either have users that can access resources that they should not be able to access, that have more rights that they should have, important documents which are not protected as they should be, the lack of network segmentation in the company, and so on. The more permissive a work environment is, the more risks are introduced. And not having procedures in place increases the chances of missing signs that you have been breached. So prevention is the first important step, and recommendations for prevention are widely covered through multiple channels. You have patch management systems, layered security, restrictive policies for your employees, security training for your employees, which is very, very important, zero trust network, risk management program, and so on. As we observed in our case study, the threat actor performed discovery and lateral movement, and it was able to exfiltrate some documents. If some sort of network segmentation and user right restrictions were in place, the damage surfaced could have been greatly reduced. And even if those documents were exfiltrated, if they were at least password protected, the threat actors would not be able to read them. So these are very important as a preventive state and should be completed with maximum responsibility because, again, prevention is the best treatment. But what enterprise sectors should understand is that breaches do happen and it can happen to them. And it is important to prepare to avoid them, but it's also important to prepare to respond to them because time is of the essence in this situation. And one should know exactly what to do when it receives the news you have been breached, besides panicking. When you find yourself in the middle of a breach, how many of us know what to do, where to start? How many companies have a protocol in place to follow in these situations? Very few. And during the 10, 11 years I've been handling forensic investigation, I think chaos is the perfect word to describe the picture. We have dealt with so many problems that have cumbered with the forensic process, which is very difficult to do by default. But we have often encountered circumstances where if things were done differently, the puzzle the forensic team had to put together would have been completed. And these problems are from various areas. First, we have communication with the victim. Often they tend not to tell the whole story from the beginning, either because of sensitive information or because it is an incident that they rather keep it internally. But unfortunately, it usually is a key information in the investigation. And if we had known it sooner, significant time would have been gained. The more a forensic team knows from the beginning, the faster it can solve the case and the company can go back to its activity. So my advice is sign all the necessary NDAs and provide all the information from the beginning to the investigative team. A second problem we are facing is the lack of necessary information, mostly because of some errors during the process. Either because the logging was not enabled prior to the incident, or some systems were shut down to minimize the damages. But this way, the forensic team cannot analyze the memory, or some servers were cleaned because they need to retake their activity, and the IT team reinstalled the operating system before the forensic team was able to analyze them. Forensic investigations are based on analyzing evidences, and if those evidences are missing, the team cannot be able to solve the case. Being a victim in a breach has a huge impact, and fast decisions have to be made sometimes. So it is very useful to have some kind of protocol to follow in this situation so that certain type of errors can be avoided. And as a final important aspect, we have the post-investigation phase. This process ends with a list of recommendations for the problems encountered in the organization. These recommendations should be taken very serious and should be implemented. And what I personally find useful is after remediation, the organization should perform another audit to be certain that those problems were properly fixed. So to conclude our session today, many organizations face complex advanced targeted attacks such as NIKON that we described earlier. And it is very important to learn how to be more resilient in these situations. Prevention is very important, but organizations should also prepare for breaches so that some damages could be minimized, to reduce the downtime, to be able to resume activity as much as possible. And with that, I will end my presentation here. Thank you again for joining and attending our session today. Have a great evening.